Hello, and thank you for joining us today in our study of the book of Psalms. Today we're in Psalm 132. That's a little bit longer than most of the Psalms that we've been looking at over the last couple of weeks. But this one is also rather different from the standpoint of its subject matter. Most of the Psalms in the Songs of Ascents are going to be dealing with our heart and our attitude toward God and the things that we focus on in our relationship with God. Remember, as we talked about back in Psalm 120, these songs are ones that would be sung or would be utilized. They are called songs of going up. And so it would be while they went up toward the tabernacle or toward the temple or toward Jerusalem and so on and so forth. Songs as they're going up toward the worship of God. And as you come into Psalm 132, you have a Psalm of David, and it's going to be a reminder about what David has done and the relationship between David and God. And in many ways, this is a history lesson. This one is much more about the history of David's relationship with God than it is about the other things that have been discussed in many of the other Psalms. It's 18 verses long, so it's a little bit more lengthy than some of the others. But let's notice what David says here in Psalm 132. Beginning in verse 1, we read, Lord, remember David and all his afflictions, how he swore to the Lord and vowed to the Mighty One of Jacob, Surely I will not go into the chamber of my house, or go up to the comfort of my bed. I will not give sleep to my eyes, or slumber to my eyelids, until I find a place for the Lord, a dwelling place for the Mighty One of Jacob. Behold, we heard of it in Ephratah. We found it in the fields of the woods. Let us go into his tabernacle. Let us worship at his footstool. Arise, O Lord, to your resting place, you and the ark of your strength. Let your priests be clothed with righteousness, and let your saints shout for joy. For your servant David's sake, do not turn away the face of your anointed. The Lord has sworn in truth to David. He will not turn from it. I will set upon your throne the fruit of your body. If your sons will keep my covenant and my testimony which I shall teach them, their sons also shall sit upon your throne forevermore. For the Lord has chosen Zion. He has desired it for his dwelling place. This is my resting place forever. Here I will dwell, for I have desired it. I will abundantly bless her provision. I will satisfy her poor with bread. I will also clothe her priests with salvation, and her saints shall shout aloud for joy. There I will make the horn of David grow. I will prepare a lamp for my anointed. His enemies I will clothe with shame, but upon himself his crown shall flourish. I believe I said a few moments ago that this is a psalm of David. It isn't one that was written by David, at least not directly, but it is certainly about David. And so here you have in this psalm a couple of different layers of history in regards to David's relationship with God, and in turn, God's relationship with the people of Israel and the place of worship in Israel. Let's look at a couple of different things from this psalm as we pull some lessons out of it. First of all, in Psalm 132, you begin with David's promise. In verse 3, going down through verse 5, you have that promise given by the king. And the promise is, Surely I will not go into the chamber of my house, or go up to the comfort of my bed. I will not give sleep to my eyes, or slumber to my eyelids, until I find a place for the Lord, a dwelling place for the Mighty One of Jacob. In other words, David says, I will not rest. I will not sit at ease. I will not sit back and relax until God has a place of his own, until there is a place to come together to worship God. And it was found. It says in verse 6, we heard of it in Ephratah, we found it in the fields of the woods, and it's going to eventually make its way into Jerusalem, where the tabernacle is going to be built, where those things are going to be set up and established as the place where Israel goes to worship God. But David's focus and David's promise is on making sure that there is a place for God's people to go to worship him, and that God is being placed first in the heart of David, not second, not somewhere down the line behind other business of state, but rather David is concerned first and foremost about the people's access to God by means of the things that God had established for worship. Now, as you look back at the history of David, and you look at the things that are stated in 2 Samuel and also over in Chronicles concerning the actions that David is going to undertake in regard to this, there's going to be some bumps in the road. There's going to be some things that aren't going to go exactly as they should have, and there will be consequences for those things. Yet at the same time, the heart of David is still the same. But the second thing I want you to notice is God's response to David's heart and David's desires. As things are set up and as those things are put in place, as David's desires for the people are fulfilled, you then have the reaction of God by means of God's promise. In verses 11 through 12, God says in response, "The Lord has sworn in truth to David, he will not turn from it. I will set upon your throne the fruit of your body. If your sons will keep my covenant and my testimony, which I shall teach them, their sons also shall sit upon your throne forevermore." God's promise to David is that the kingdom is going to remain in your lineage, in your family. But there's a caveat to that. It is as long as your sons keep my covenant and my testimony, which I will teach them. And so you have a promise, but the promise has a clause in it that the length of time, the extent to which that promise is going to be able to be fulfilled, is going to depend upon the family of David and the descendants of David. You're going to see this within a single generation. When it takes place in the days of Solomon, when Solomon turns away from God at that point, you are then going to have the prophet that is going to be sent to Solomon, and he's going to say, if it wasn't for the promise I'd made to David that that lineage would continue, I'd take the whole kingdom away from you, but instead I'm only going to take most of it. And thus you're going to have the divided kingdom of Israel away from in the north, from Judah in the south, and it will be the kingdom of Judah that will remain in the hands of the descendants of David as long as it lasts. But it's not going to last as long as it could have because of the sins of her kings and their unwillingness to abide by the commands and the precepts of God. As you look at Psalm 132, you have a song that is a history lesson. It is a history of David's promises and his heart toward God. It is also a history of God's promises to David. And then at the end of the psalm, you also have his statements concerning Zion, or the area around Jerusalem, and the place where he would be worshipped, where God would be worshipped there. But you have here a reminder, as they are going up to worship God, of the relationship between God and David and the promises that God had made to Israel. And that's the emphasis of Psalm 132. Thank you so much for joining us for the video today. I hope that the things that we've talked about have been beneficial for you. Next time, we'll come back and we'll look at Psalm 133. I hope you'll join us then. But until then, have a great day.